Picture this. It's a Tuesday evening in 1973. You're 9 years old. Dinner is quiet, different kind of quiet than usual. Not the comfortable silence of a family that doesn't need words. Something heavier, something with edges. Your father pushes his chair back after eating and says he's going to stay at a friend's place for a while. You don't fully understand what that means, but your stomach does. 3 weeks later, someone at school uses a word you've heard before but never applied to yourself. Divorced. And just like that, the world you knew, the world that felt permanent and solid beneath your feet, quietly split in two, like it had always been, two things, pretending to be one. Nobody sat you down and explained what was happening. Nobody asked how you were doing. Nobody had the language for it, because nobody had been through this before. Not like this, not at this scale. You were part of something that had never happened in human history, and you carried it alone. Between 1960 and 1980, the divorce rate in the United States more than doubled. In 1960, there were 2.2 divorces per 1,000 marriages. By 1979, that number had risen to 5.3, a historical peak that has never been matched before or since. Which means if you were born between 1965 and 1975, you were a child directly in the path of the single greatest disruption to American family life in the 20th century. This wasn't a personal failure of your family. It wasn't bad luck. It was a revolution. Cultural, legal, social. A complete restructuring of what marriage meant and what family looked like. And the children caught in the middle of that revolution? Nobody asked them. Nobody prepared them. Nobody even fully understood what was happening to them at the time. Today, we're going to talk about what it actually did to a generation, to a psychology, to you. It started with a signature. In 1969, California Governor Ronald Reagan, yes, that Ronald Reagan, signed the nation's first no-fault divorce law. For the first time in American history, a married couple could legally separate without proving abuse, adultery, or abandonment, without assigning blame, without a fight in court. You simply said, "This marriage is no longer working," and the state said, "Okay." By 1977, most states had followed. By 1985, no-fault divorce was available across the entire country. The intention was humane. Nobody should be trapped in a loveless or dangerous marriage. Women especially, who had historically been the most vulnerable in bad marriages, finally had a legal exit that didn't require them to prove they'd been victimized. That was right. That was necessary. But something else happened alongside it that nobody fully anticipated. Divorce became easy, socially acceptable, even, in certain cultural circles, a sign of personal growth, of choosing yourself, of refusing to settle. Between 1965 and 1975, the number of children affected by divorce in America tripled. Tripled. In a single decade. Millions of children sitting at dinner tables just like that 9-year-old, about to have the floor disappear beneath them, and no one in the room with the vocabulary to explain it. Here is what the research, conducted years and decades later, found about what those children actually went through. First, the confusion. Children under 12 do not have the cognitive framework to understand marital incompatibility. What they understand is much simpler and much more devastating. Mommy and daddy don't want to be together, and the question that follows, that no child can help asking, even if they never say it out loud, is, was it me? Psychologists call this self-blame. It is almost universal in children of divorce, and it is almost never addressed, because the adults are too consumed by their own pain to notice it happening. Second, the loyalty split. Suddenly you had two homes, two sets of rules, two parents who, even when they tried to be civil, were fundamentally on opposite sides of a wound. Every weekend handoff, every holiday negotiation, every time one parent said something about the other, even something small, even something careful, you were standing in the middle of a fault line trying not to fall in. Third, the acceleration. Children of divorce in the 1970s grew up faster, not because they chose to, Because they had to. Someone had to be emotionally available in the house. Someone had to hold things together. Someone had to not fall apart. Very often, that someone was you. You became the adult before anyone gave you permission, before you were ready, before you even understood that was what was happening. And you got very good at it, disturbingly good. That capability, the ability to read a room, to manage emotions, to hold yourself together under pressure, it became one of your greatest strengths. It was also built on a foundation of loss. Here is what made it worse. While your family was quietly coming apart, the culture around you was still pretending everything was fine. Television showed you the Brady Bunch. Perfect blended family, everyone smiling, every problem resolved in 22 minutes. Happy days, family ties, households where parents stayed together, communicated openly, and always said the right thing at the right moment. And you sat on the floor in front of that television, maybe in your mom's new apartment, maybe at your dad's weekend place, watching those fictional families and feeling something you couldn't quite name. Not just sadness, something more complicated than that. A quiet sense that your life was somehow wrong, that the normal thing, the thing everyone else had been taken from you, or maybe that you had never deserved it in the first place. Nobody on television looked like you. Nobody in your school books talked about this. Your teachers didn't have the training for it. Your friends didn't have the language for it. Even the therapists of the 1970s were only beginning to study what divorce did to children. The data didn't fully exist yet. You were living inside a social experiment in real time. And the world was still printing brochures about the American family dream, while your specific American family dream was being quietly packed into boxes. Judith Wallerstein was a psychologist who began studying children of divorce in 1971. She followed the same group of people for 25 years. What she found was not what most people expected. The conventional wisdom at the time was that children are resilient, that they adjust, that after a year or two, things go back to normal. Wallerstein found something different. The effects didn't fade with time. In many cases, they deepened. As these children entered their own adult relationships, specific patterns emerged. A heightened fear of abandonment, difficulty trusting that love was permanent, an almost automatic bracing for loss whenever things felt too good, because experience had taught them that stability doesn't last. Some avoided commitment entirely. Better not to need someone than to need them and lose them. Some overcommitted, throwing everything into relationships, terrified of being alone, repeating cycles they'd promised themselves they'd never repeat. And here is the part that matters most. None of this was weakness. None of this was dysfunction. It was adaptation. It was a nervous system that had learned, at a very young age, in a very permanent way, that the ground can disappear without warning. So it stayed ready, always slightly braced, always slightly watching, for decades, without anyone ever explaining why. If you grew up in a home that divorce touched, and statistically there is a very real chance you did, here is what I want to say to you directly. What happened to you was real. The confusion was real. The loss was real. The growing up too fast was real. And the fact that you handled it, that you kept going, kept functioning, kept showing up, does not mean it did not cost you something. It means you were strong enough to pay the price without complaining, which is admirable, and which is also its own kind of quiet tragedy. You deserve someone to sit with you and explain what was happening. You deserve to know that the fault line running through your family had nothing to do with your worth. You deserve to not have to become the adult before you finished being the child. None of that happened for most of you. The world was not ready to give it. But here, right now, I want you to know. What you felt was accurate. What you lost was real. And the strength you built in the absence of stability, that is yours. Nobody gave it to you. You made it yourself. Out of nothing. Which means, if anyone knows how to build something solid from the ground up, it is you. If this video touched something you've carried for a long time, leave a comment below. You don't have to share everything. Even just, "This was me," is enough. Because sometimes the most healing thing isn't a solution. It's just knowing that someone finally saw it and named it. If someone in your life grew up through the divorce revolution, share this with them. Some things need to be said out loud before they can start to heal. I'll see you in the next one, James.